Give us a sign when you're ready.
Maybe I'll get started now. I think we can get started
Yeah,
now.
let's go.
Okay, once again, good
over to you.
afternoon. Thank you, Laye. Good afternoon to you all, Dr. Kamana, Usman, colleagues. For those of you joining online, warm welcome as well. My name is Katrin Glatzel. I'm the Director of Global Strategy and Programs with AKADEMIYA2063, based here in Kigali. I'm filling in for my colleague Getau Tadessa, who's unfortunately unable to join us this afternoon. So I'll be moderating this afternoon session. We're delighted to welcome you here at AKADEMIYA2063 headquarters for our inaugural Kigali Research and Policy Seminar on unpacking the CAADP agenda. Most of you will probably be familiar with AKADEMIYA2063. So just very shortly, in a nutshell, AKADEMIYA2063 works to support the African Union and African Union member states in the implementation of the African Union Agenda 2063, as well as other continental and global policy processes and policy agendas. And we do so by providing access to data and analytics, by facilitating peer-to-peer learning and dialogue, and also capacity strengthening activities across stakeholder groups. And of course, one of the key policy frameworks that has been shaping African countries' work towards strengthening agri-food systems over the past decades has been CAADP. And given the recent adoption of the next 10-year CAADP strategy, the Kampala Declaration, and its recent official launch, we thought it would be good to take this first inaugural seminar as an opportunity to take stock of the past 2 decades of CAADP. What are the lessons learned, but also to look forward how we can best support the domestication at the country level over the next 10 years. So we have a rich agenda over the next 1.5 hours, including statements from Dr. Kamana, from Dr. Badian, Mr. Kwitsera, and of course, ample room for discussion here in the room. You're joining on Q&A and also later on for coffee outside. So without much further ado, I'm handing over to Dr. Olivier Kamana, Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources here in Rwanda. Over to you, Dr. Kamana.
Thank you. Dear Dr. Usman Badian, Executive Chairperson of the participants from protocols observed, I'm delighted to participate in this event on the important topic, Building Resilient Agrifood Systems in Africa, Unpacking the CAADP Agenda from Maputo to Kampala. This topic could not be timely. It's of particular importance and offers well-researched information which is valuable as we seek for innovative ways to unlock the potential of agri-food systems to solve some of pressing challenges such as food insecurity, youth and women employment in line with the recently adopted CAADP strategy and action plan 2026-2035. Africa's agri-food systems are at crossroads from rising climate shocks, deepening vulnerabilities, and declining donor aid. While progress has been made under the CAADP framework, the continent is still grappling with challenges of food security, with about 1 out of every 5 Africans remaining hungry. Population growth, demographic change, and urbanization are placing pressure on Africa's food systems to increase yield and make more food available, as well as to produce more diverse and more nutritious foods. These calls for international policies to enhance women's participation and empowerment in food systems. The 2025 Kampala Declaration presents an opportunity to shift from agricultural transformation lens to a broader goal of high-performing, inclusive agri-food systems. In December 2024, the Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources, through the Agriculture Sector Working Group, adopted the 5th Strategic Plan for Agriculture Transformation, known as PSTA5, a blueprint policy document to steer our food systems transformation for nutrition and income in the country. The PSTA5 is aligned with the National Strategy for Transformation, NST2, 2024-2020. 9, which economic pillar aims to modernize agriculture and animal resources sectors, with investments estimated at 7.2 trillion Rwandan francs, which is about 5.6 billion USD. The PSA5 is expected to contribute to solving the grand challenges such as malnutrition and youth unemployment, and contribute to wealth creation. Through a food system approach, PSA5 outlines the government's commitment to providing infrastructure, proximity extension services, research, and social protection from which women and youth benefit. This PSA5 centers on market-led growth for the sector, looking to facilitate a sustainable food systems transformation. This meeting and the conversation we'll be having today come at a very important time as we domesticate the CAADP strategy and implement our PSA5. I would like to close by thanking you all for the invitation to join this important meeting, and I wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamana, for some pointed opening remarks, and yeah, for taking the time to be with us here today. Usman, I'd like to hand over to you to deliver your presentation on unpacking the agenda.
Thank you very much. So we haven't had time to have, people introduce themselves around the table, but perhaps as we take the floor, we can introduce ourselves, and those online can briefly use the message box to also introduce themselves. So thank you very much, all of you, especially online, for joining us. And our guests in the room here, it's a pleasure having you all with us. As they say, all protocol observed. So this is the first series of policy and research seminars that we would like to organize here at the office in Kigali, to exchange with the community around us, but also to receive their feedback and to know the issues that are moving them, so we can reflect on that together. So we thought the first of these seminars could focus on something that is unfolding across the continent, which is the CAADP agenda from Maputo to Kampala. We are getting ready for the next 10 years. We have 20 years behind us, and we would like to start a discussion around it. Kampala was adopted in January, and heads of state expect countries to start implementation by January 2026. So we're going to be using this year to clarify those modalities, and we means actually the CAADP constituency under the leadership of AUC and AUDA NEPAD. So we can go to the next slide, where I have the 5 points that I'll be covering. There's some transformation strategies prior to CAADP, because we have to have that longer-term understanding. We take a lot of things for granted, so that will allow us to see the trajectory we have made up to now. Then how CAADP has helped to renew food system strategies across the continent. That's important to see that. Anybody jumping into the game over the last 20 years will take a lot of things for granted. And when you do, you're easily forsaking those things in the future. You don't know how worthwhile they are. Then I would like us to look at the 20 years of achievements and what we can, and which we could use as a foundation to build on. And the reason is that we haven't still in Africa come to going beyond conventional wisdom or the easily grabbable slogans or things like that. But I think we are in a fast-moving pace and a fast-changing environment. So unpacking things, looking at what's really happening on the ground is very important. One of the slogans that carries the day today are the binary review outcomes that everybody grabs. Somebody gives you just one snapshot, and it's not going to take you very far. If you want to, come to action and get things done, you need to look under the hood and be able to unpack things. So we'll talk about it a little bit. We'll see that there are strong achievements, but also there are warning signs there. If you're in an environment like in Africa where you would like to change things and move the dial, then you always have to look at where you are, weak, where you're not meeting your aspirations, and try to improve those. So the warning signs before they become problems are important for us to look at. And finally, what are the lessons for the next 10 years of CAADP. So we'll go to the next slide, where I would like to just have a few key messages that will help us focus as we continue the presentation. First one is we have made solid progress over the last 20 years, especially if you compare to the prior 20 or 30 years. But there are signs that things, some places may be stagnating, and there will be a very strong need to regain the momentum. So Kampala really should be, yes, about celebrating the achievements of the last 20 years, but also being very sanguine about what needs to be done to recapture that momentum. And while we think about doing that, these future strategies must be guided both by ambition and progress. And I make the distinctions here. The biennial review measures ambitions, right? Are we there? And we may fall short of our ambitions or exceed our ambitions, right? But the progress on the ground is a different story, because then it's a little bit more granular and we need to do that, right? In particular, because the biennial review has a binary scoring, yes or no, one or zero, whatever. So when you look at that, if it's no, that's not enough to build an action on. What does no mean, right? So unpacking is important. Here's an example. If every African country was growing by 5% and all allocating 9% of budget, not one single African country would be meeting the commitments. It will be red everywhere. Yet that's a very formidable progress. So therefore, it's good to be cognizant about us falling short of our ambitions, but it's carrying the day-to-day. Nobody has met, which is okay, but what is under that? What can we learn from it? So we need to unpack that. So unpacking the past performance is going to be useful in drawing lessons for future transformation agenda. So next slide, which is the transition slide. So we're going to be focusing on now the strategies prior to CAADP. I would like us really to carry this forward so that we know why we need to improve and perfect CAADP as we go forward. So the next slide. I hope this is going to be clear a little bit for those in the room. African countries, like anybody in the world, have been struggling since independence with managing tensions in terms of public policy. Are we focusing on agriculture? Are we focusing on industry? Are we driving as a government? Are we running the private sector? No matter which status you have been, this has been the tension to manage, right? So, and here basically you can see in these illustrative lines, the horizontal line on the left, you're all focusing on agriculture, right? You're all focusing on industry. Up is your government-led, doing everything, and down you're creating space for markets and private sector. So let's see how Africa has done over, especially since independence. Let's move to the next slide. If you look at food system strategy in Africa in the 50s and 60s, it was all industry and public sector led. It was government trying to get to industry very quickly. Okay, that interfered with food system strategy and policies, and we'll talk about later, right? But I want like you just to focus on how things are shifting. From there, it moves to basic needs, rural transformation, rural development, where we had all these parastatals going all over doing everything. Then from there, it went to the other extreme, down to the social adjustment policies, where you move from government trying to get all the way to the end of market and private sector. And this was the environment within which we were trying to do food system transformation economic policy. We shifted a little bit towards agriculture in the 90s and 2000 with the poverty reduction strategy program. And each one of these bullets, there are a multitude of things. Maybe demography, maybe it's environment, maybe it's inclusivity. So things kept on changing decade and decade within decade. So African countries didn't have the time to sit down to get some continuity and some consistency and coherence in the policy-making system. So next slide. Okay. And during those years where we're moving around, we had strategies that were a little bit being influenced by these tensions. How much government, how much private sector, how much industry, how much agriculture. And this is just an illustrative list of what used to happen before CAADP. If you take the marketing sector, for example, government agencies have had complete monopoly to buy from producers and even sometimes to sell. You have example of Malawi, where Admark was a sole buyer of maize. It has changed lately. You had Madagascar, where a state organization was responsible for rice wholesale and retail. There was no private sector participation, no farmers. In Kenya, actually, I said this when I was challenged by a young person. The time it was illegal to transfer a bag of maize across district line. You go to jail. It's just illegal. We had those things. And this is not history, actually, by the way. I'm saying it because we may return to them if you don't know that we have done these things before. And there are some signs in some countries where these things are happening. So in pricing, on trade, in processing and input, we had all these different policies because of our difficulty to manage that tension that ended up creating a real problem for Africa, right? I don't want to go into the detail, but I just wanted to know that we did a lot of things that were not here anymore. And people may think they can turn to because they think it was probably never tried. In my own country, they're talking about things that are similar to this, and my country is Senegal. So next slide. So, and this is what happened in the 60s to the 70s. Africa was growing quite nicely. And suddenly, because of those policies trying to manage these tensions, government, private sector, markets, industry, agriculture, not knowing exactly where and going around through all these strategies, changing all the time, we missed the ball badly. And the economy started really, like Chino Achebe would say, falling apart until the mid-2000s, and it started going up again, right? And this history is important for us. And then let's go and see what this did to us. Our next slide, our difficulty to manage the tension and creating the space. In this piece, what we did, we looked at what should be the actual size of agriculture in the early 2000s as a sector and a share of GDP, and what was the real, and what should be the potential based on our state of development. Because agriculture changes size as the economy developed, right? And the red dots are the actual size of agriculture in our economies. The blue squares are what the size should have been. Our difficulty is managing that tension between government, private sector, industry and agriculture, and the policies that keeps on changing all the time. And what we did ended up stunting agriculture. Agriculture was not given the space, not the resources, not the directions, not the attention, not the policy and strategies to keep on growing. And this really had huge implications for Africa over the last few decades. And this is why before the SDGs, when we talk about the MDGs in the 90s, Africa was everywhere in the red, okay? If we go to the next slide, you'll see how this has affected poverty. If you go towards the origin of this graph, you have the highest gap between actual and what should have been the normal size of agriculture, right? The higher the gap and the more the level of poverty. So our difficulty in managing that tension, going around and not having the kinds of policies that were needed because of that lack of coherence and consistency and just everything changing every year, created a difficulty that led to the stunting of agriculture, growing less than it should have, being smaller than it should have been, and that also had to have an impact in terms of poverty, okay? So the next slide, this is the history of CAADP. Now let's look at what CAADP did to try and change. And until this, in 2000, it will be a World Bank annual report that will define the agenda for Africa, or UNDP report, or an FAO report. Would it be something coming from here, from any country or from any organization? We may have just forgotten about it or taken for granted, but until 2000, that's what was driving agendas in Africa. So what did CAADP do? Let's go to the next slide. It moved us into that corner where we are agriculture focused, agriculture led, and a little bit more balance between government and private sector. We don't have the preference that it should be government led. We don't have the preference that it should be private sector led. We say we are agriculture focused, agriculture led growth and poverty reduction agenda. And we focused on that, and this is what we drove for the last 20 years. And that created the coherence, the consistency, and the space for us to focus and incrementally improve what we're doing. So to the next slide, you see what makes CAADP unique, not just in the history of Africa, but also globally. It has a set of shared principles. It has a clear strategic direction and common goals and targets for countries to share. It's no longer what's happening internationally or globally. Yes, it informs what we do, but we sat down as countries and we figured out how we wanted to do business, right? So it was African owned and led. We have a very strong mutual accountability, actually unique to Africa. I don't think anybody else have anything like that. Agriculture-led growth, evidence-based policy implementation, which used not to be the case actually. Now we take also for granted that we refer to the binary review, to data, to evidence. This was new. There were few words here that did not exist in the lexicon of development in Africa before CAADP. Country-owned, country-led, mutual accountability, they were not there at all. So those are big changes that CAADP brought. And then we have the common goals and targets in the form of these commitments, both Maputo and Malabo. So let's go to the next slide. And here, this is the first 10-year cycle of CAADP, which is the Maputo cycle, 2003 and 13. So very limited, 2 commitments, a goal of 6% and budget share of 10%. All right, that's what countries are being asked to do and supported by 4 pillars. Sustainable land management, food security, nutrition, infrastructure and market, and science and technology. But there are not really programmatic things developed. It was just saying that invest in these areas so that you can mobilize 10%, invest in these areas, and get 6% to growth. So, and you see the incrementality when we go from Maputo to Malabo, which is the 10 years, next 10 years, the next slide. It starts unpacking the agenda here. You have the 7 commitment areas from halving hunger and poverty to halving poverty to ending hunger to boosting inter-African trade. So you have 7 areas where countries are being expected to do more in addition to the 10% and the 6%. So which is actually did happen accidentally, was not planned at the beginning, but it's the way you do things. You start small and you expand as you go, right? And I will go back now in the next slide to the implementation of this before I go to the next Kampala. The 20 years of CAADP implementation has given us an idea of how best to do this. This was a continental agenda. What happened during Maputo, because it was unprecedented, there was a very systematic and clear process of country-state agenda, right? It was very formal, from setting up a group, a memo to the cabinet, defining a set of data and analytics, convening everybody around the round table, and having a formal product at the round table called the Compact. Incidentally, it was here in Rwanda, actually, that this was really invented, right? Nobody sat down and designed it. And just a parenthesis, it was in 2005, and around this time, that a message came from Kigali, from the President's office to the NEPA Secretariat, and I was working there as an advisor, saying, look, we did twice poverty and strategy programs. If we really didn't have the output we wanted, we want CAADP to inform our next agenda. And NEPA wasn't ready, AUC wasn't ready. So we had to come here. I sat in Kigali almost from July 2005 to March 2006, just to figure out how do you do that. That's where all the things actually emerge until the end, right? But this specific set of action was extremely critical to the success of CAADP during the Maputo. You will see when I talked about warning signs is that the momentum we had was a lot due to the systematic approach to bringing the continental agenda into the country agenda and follow through. That provided results, and we didn't have that anymore under Malabo. So let's go to the next slide. What you had during Maputo and making sure that this agenda can be implemented, and there were just 2 commitments, but I had a broad and inclusive approach to through a roundtable process where Minister of Finance, Agriculture, Industry, and Trade were around the table talking about agriculture. Farming and agribusiness communities were there, national and regional banking sector, regional economic communities, NARS. It was really a movement. And when a country had a compact, all these different were not just inputting into the compact, but also part of this common undertaking. That made Maputo a very, very strong movement. And up to 30 countries did this. There were 30 compacts that clarified what the countries want to do. So let's go to the next slide. So there was a minimum of data and analytics to inform that roundtable. So stock taking and foresight, here are the 5 documents that every single country produced to go to the roundtable, where they look at existing strategy document, public expenditure review, do sector performance review, growth and poverty reduction outlook, review accountability processes, even the data analytical capacities were looked at, and they were put in these 5 documents. There's a first set from Rwanda produced in early 2006, and 30 countries did the same thing. So next slide. And the outcome of that, when you get to the roundtable, was a clear compact, a document that was signed. Here is, I think, the one from Nigeria, where you have agreed, all those participants, about sector investment priorities to meet the 6% growth, funding strategies to meet the investment cost, measures to improve sector strategy and policies, action plan for even coordination, and yes, the first year program activities and outcome, right? So there was really a very systematic way of doing this, okay? So this we didn't have under Malabo. And I think that took away a little bit the focus on that, allowing individual countries to do X, Y, and Z and call it Malabo and CAADP, but we didn't have this, how do you call it, good neighborhood effect. So feeling a little bit of competition with your neighbor and doing a little bit better. So next slide. So this is the first compact ever signed here in Rwanda by the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Agriculture, the head of COMESA, and the representative of the World Bank representing the donors. It was really a shared understanding and partnership of what CAADP was then, right? And this carried CAADP for 10 years, right? So next slide. Now, these 10 years ushered into us doing things differently, at least avoiding back and forth, understanding the tensions, public, private, market industry in a different way around a focused agenda, as you've seen, agriculture-led agenda. You go to the next slide, you have a few indicators of just what happened over those few years. Here we have average GDP growth. You remember the graph that I first saw when things were going down, ala Chinua Achebe, things falling apart. And this is the reversal of that. You have GDP, average constant US trillion dollars, which increased twofold, and GDP per capita by 1/3 over the first 20 years of CAADP. Next slide. You have public expenditure in absolute level that went up almost doubling, as well as agriculture value added in terms of $1 billion. So there was increased effort in putting money into agriculture. We missed this when we focus on the 10%, did you reach it or not, right? But the level of effort has increased quite a bit, okay? And of course, if you do more somewhere else, then the ratio will fall down, and we'll come back and talk about that. That's where we need to do better. But certainly, countries spent more for agriculture, and value added also grew more over this year, opposite the trends we had before CAADP. The next slide is looking at a graph that I like to show that many people actually don't often see. The red line on the top is the growth of agriculture value added in Africa. The others are the rest of the world. Not only was Africa growing faster, but the distance is expanding as you go. This is unprecedented. It didn't happen before CAADP, actually, before the 2000s. It would be the opposite. The red line would be at the bottom and just straight and going, right? So something happened here. If Africa over those 20 years has the fastest growing agricultural sector in the world. We are not happy with the growth because there's much more that we need to do, but we never had anything like this, okay? So next slide. And not just did value added in agriculture grow, but also productivity of labor and land grew, which was also a reversal of what we saw in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You have to go back to the 60s to see what you've seen in Africa over the last 20 years. Next slide. And here we're talking about trade, Africa's global agricultural exports. This is in current US dollars. There's a little bit of an exchange rate effect on it, but we know that the dollar doesn't appreciate that much in terms of doubling. So a lot of it is volume driven. But you see the volume have gone up, both in terms of inter-African trade as well as global exports, also over those same 20 years. I think the last slide, next slide is going to be the last indicator around poverty and about hunger and nutrition. So stunting and wasting going to go down. Those who looking back at the MDGs in the 90s, Africa's trends were actually going up. We're all worried and concerned that nutrition indicators, when the world was talking about halving, Africa had the opposite trend. In the last 20 years, it's different. So next slide. But all this is good and great, but we're talking about 20-year period. They are warning signs, as you could have seen in some of those graphs. And as we think about Kampala and moving forward, these are very important. Let's look at the first of these warning signs. Now, look at GDP per capita. It grew fast in the first 10 years or so of CAADP. In the last 10 years, second 10-year period is almost flat. You see the agricultural value added growth rate has lowered from 4% to 3%. We don't have to wait until this gets into negative territory. This is now the time to know that things are not going the way they should, and we have to look at every country. Every country ought to look at how am I doing with these two indicators. Am I going still up? Am I stagnating, or am I declining? The next slide. You see here public expenditure. Yes, in absolute level, we have increased, but in relative levels, this should not be happening. Public expenditure share of expansion total is declining. The goal was to increase it. All right, even if it stagnated at 5 or 4%, it wasn't good enough, let alone now it's declining. And I can give you that as a country if you say, well, I have a lot of other needs, which is okay. But if it goes to agriculture, the next slide, am I returning enough to agriculture? If agriculture, no, sorry, the next graph, yeah, to the right. If agriculture gives me 100, how much am I returning to agriculture? And even then, we're not returning enough to agriculture, right? So, which is a different way of looking at it. So either as a share of expenditure or as a share of what we return into agriculture, we're not doing enough. So Kampala should change this as we go forward. Next slide. Look at inter-African trade and global trade. All right, so here on the global inter-African trade, in terms of levels, we're stagnating or about to decline, okay? So and export as a share of global agricultural export is also stagnating or about to decline. So we did have a good shift early on in CAADP, but the last 10 years are not where we want to be. So Kampala should take us somewhere else. And these are warning signs for you to be aware of. Whatever is driving our trade, our competitiveness, our performance, that's what individual countries will need to look into. Next slide, please. And here is the level of undernourishment as estimated by FAO started going up. I'm a little bit puzzled by this, but I must have the numbers because growth and all other indicators are going up into productivity. But then the thing that is going up again and started going up quite a while, actually. So for me is something that we need to pay a lot of attention. Could be that growth is just not trickling down enough to the poor people. Whatever is there, we need to look into that. So you look at the bar graph. A good decrease between across the between the two between the first 15 years, but then it's going up again and stagnating. Every country needs to look into this, right? So there are warning signs there. We did well. We have these achievements. We have turned things around from prior to CAADP, but CAADP is getting tired a bit. So we have to pay attention, and see what we can change here as we move forward. These are African average data, and they are here as a signal for every country to look at the same data for themselves and then see whether they're part of this global trend or they're doing better. Next slide. So now what are the lessons for the Kampala agenda? I have about 5 of them, I think, Madam Moderator, and then it's going to be it. Okay, thank you. So let's look at the first lesson. Here is Kampala, where we've tried to deepen the policy and institutional innovation. All right, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time here, but while we're preparing Kampala, we organized 13 technical working groups, Women's AKADEMIYA2063, but those working groups were convened by African Centers of Expertise. We just did a scope of work, terms of reference, coordination, but we leave it to them. And they work with their peers across Africa and with global agencies like FAO and others. These 13 technical working groups led to the agenda as we know it today from Kampala, which is in the next slide, with 6 commitment areas, okay? From intensifying agriculture, food production and processing in industries and trade, to investment. The next slide actually will summarize it a little bit for us. Go to the next slide. So basically the first 2 are about growth and finance. The bottom 2 at the middle are about nutrition equity, and the last 2 at the bottom are about resilience and governance. It's really much broader than Malabo and much more in line with the food system lens as well. So that is the new agenda that we have, which is Kampala. And we think it's the most inclusive agenda. More of those during those 90 days when your University of Accra, Makerere, Ibadan, UP, and others were working on doing this with their peers, there were consultations going on around the continent, regional level, stockholder levels, and there were invitations for memoranda to be submitted, 65 of them for anybody who had something to say. That's what led to the 6 commitment areas, 22 main targets, and 35 intervention areas. right? As we go towards implementing this, we should keep in mind those warning signs. And I think countries start in 2026, but those warning signs are going to be very, very important for us. Next slide. So the first lesson, therefore, is we're all captured by the biennial review, which is important, but we have to distinguish ambitions from progress. Yes, we have to acknowledge the challenges reflecting the BR outcome, but we have to go beyond that and unpack country trajectories over the past 20 years. Each country really ought to be doing that. Just not limit yourself with the biennial review things. We should identify strengths and weaknesses and know how we can advance agri-food system transformation. That's what the domestication should be about. If you look at the Maputo process with the data, the analytics, the roundtables, the outcomes, and the inclusivity, if we do that, then we'll probably figure out how to deal with those warning signs in the next 20 years, next 10 years. Next slide. We have to recapture the momentum here. There has been a real turnaround compared to stagnation, decline of the 80s and 90s, but several key performance indicators have plateaued with declining trends. That cannot continue. It has to be the opposite of that. So effective implementation of Kampala is needed to accelerate the pace of progress. Let's emulate more Maputo and less Malabo in terms of how we approach domestication. When I said that, Maputo was systematic and was very tactical. Malabo was more general, sensitization, awareness raising. So we have to go back to the planning and design process of Maputo. Next slide. This gets us exactly to domestication alignment. So Maputo was guided by clear, well-articulated steps was implemented. You could actually count which countries have domesticated Maputo. You couldn't under Malabo. Malabo was more loose, focused on awareness raising. So Kampala can emulate Malabo more, as I said. Robust evidence to inform and guide consultations, inclusive roundtables, diagram priorities, review and partnership modalities, and formal outcome in form of a compact signed by government, communities, development partners, and non-state actors. It could be called whatever it is, roadmap, action plan, whatever, but something that is signed. Number 4, next lesson. Next slide. So evidence-driven approach. Start with assessing where countries are vis-a-vis all these Kampala priorities. 22 targets, 35 intervention areas, 6 commitments. Evaluate what is possible and define a clear milestone to guide future action. That's what happened in Maputo. And invest in capacities and review processes to track performance. And finally, the last one, next slide, filling the data gaps. So let's embrace the BR and the journal sector reviews that many countries have already started doing. These are real achievements. Let's embrace them and use them as the impetus to improve data quality and availability. We have seen how much they could improve those mutual accountability processes. We need to better leverage our centers of expertise in the countries. I'm good to see that the Economic Policy Research Network here in Kampala is in the room, and Rwanda is in the room, but we need to do that. We are very pleased to have seen how African centers of expertise actually put together the Kampala agenda from universities to specialized agencies and across the continent. And I think at the country level, we need to do that. So we need to embrace newer tools like geospatial and AI to boost timeliness, granularity, and quality of data. We're working here in Rwanda to do that. We have set up new systems, developed new system for another half a dozen countries, and we expect to continue to do that. There's a lot we can do in the ag space and the food system space when it comes to data availability, timeliness, and the like. So let me stop here and thank you all for your attention, and thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much, Usman, for this historic sort of overview and very rich presentation. It's really good to have this institutional knowledge, I think, and to make sure we learn from past experiences. And I'm sure there are plenty of questions in the room and online, but before we open up to audience questions, I'd like to invite Mr. Seth Kutsera, who's the Executive Director of the Economic Policy Research Network here in Rwanda, to share some reflections, and in particular, the PS in his opening remarks referred to the PSTA5. Now, looking at the Kampala Declaration, and in particular, these 6 commitment areas that we saw on the slide just a moment ago, how would you say the framework, the Kampala Declaration, is consistent with Rwanda's pressing priorities to strengthen its agriculture sector, and in particular in relation to the PSTA5?
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. As she said, I'm called Seth Kwizera. I'm the director at the Economic Policy Research Network. It's a think tank which works in the field of economic development. We do research and training. And coming back to the question you asked, actually, when you read the six priorities of the CAADP and you read our PST5, I may say there are no much like gaps when I assess from my perspective, because moving from production, increasing the production, the post-harvest handling. If I started extending the production, because as Pierce said, of course, the population is increasing. So we need to think how we'll be able to feed our population in a sustainable way. So when you see the measures set up in the PSA5 or countries PSA5 on increasing the production, bringing in the new methodologies, new what you can call climate resilient agriculture practices, or the methods or the measures which are targeting increasing the production or increasing the productivity. So this is something which will allow the country to increase the production going forward. So when you have production, you have to think on how to handle the production, because the PSA5 also talks on handling the production. That is where there is like issues of, processing, because I think the second one was how to enhance industries or agro-processing. When you look at countrywide, we have industrial parks. In most of them, many of industries now are focusing on agro-processing. So what the country has in the PSA5 on think on how to increase value addition for the production we have, I can see it is in a very, very high matching with the priority of the country. And another thing I can mention is on inclusiveness. Inclusiveness, when we see from the PSA5, it promotes inclusivity and equitable livelihoods, because the strategy prioritizes gender inclusion by ensuring women have equal access to agriculture resources and decision making. There is an example which is mentioned in the PSA5, whereby it indicates that one of the target of it is to ensure at least 30% of beneficiaries of small irrigation tools should be women, compared to where we are now. These numbers are in the PSA5. Currently, 60% of men-headed households have access to irrigation tools, compared to 10 of female-headed households. So this shows how the strategy ensures the development has to go with ensuring no one is left behind, specifically by ensuring the equity which was mentioned. Another item I can mention is what we call sustainable farming, because when we look on how to do activities in Rwanda currently, because maybe the nature of the land, if we can't make it if we continue doing the agriculture from the traditional practices, what we used to do, because currently our agriculture is mainly rain-fed. But in terms of sustainability, that's where the strategy bring in the modernization item. How can we make sure the modernization is not only for large-scale agriculture, but also to small-scale agriculture? Maybe there is technology which is of course adequate to big companies of that scale farming, but maybe that's why there is need of research to see the technology which can be adequate to those small-scale farmers we are talking about. And lastly is on the role of providing the evidence for decision making, the research. The strategy, I mean the PSA5, provides the relevance of having evidence-based decision-making and mutual accountability, whereby whatever is planned in this strategy will be informed or based on the data which is reliable. That is what I can mention of now. Of course, maybe as I conclude this, there are two things where you can see we need to reflect strategically. One is on funding. PS said it requires about 7 trillion to implement this PSA5. And this is something, of course, the strategy says it can be achieved through PPP, but we need to think this budget is not small, but it's doable. So what I think we need more efforts from country, from private sector, to see how we mobilize private sector to be much involved in agriculture, to see agriculture as a good business, beneficial business which can yield income, so that we can attract more investors into this, because we can't expect this huge money to come from the national budget only. That is something where I think we need to think, because also there are some targets in the CAADP of the budget needed, and we also need the targets in the P35. So there is a need of strategic thinking on how to attract more private investors in this budget. Number two is on the mindset changing. I mentioned on current production practices, which needs to be improved or modernized. Last week I was in a meeting and we were discussing around Irish potato value chain. Currently, I don't know if maybe with the PS from the Minagri, currently the production per hectare is around, I think, 8 or 12 tons per hectare, around that. But when you compare to countries like Holland, whereby where they go up to 45 tons per hectare, if that shows us how we need to transform the way we do agriculture. The productivity per hectare, the land is there, static, but the population, of course, is increasing. So then we need to see how we take measures to increase the productivity. This goes with having quality seeds, which are affordable on time to farmers, to make sure they have access to good quality seeds and fertilizers to ensure increased productivity. So when we are discussing some of the issues, there are some seeds which are of high quality, but farmers cannot afford them because some of them are patented or protected from their countries where they were invented. So in line with the CAADP, maybe there is a lot of thinking, if you have good seeds in countries in Africa, how can we make them maybe open to all African farmers? That was one of the issues which you can think, because of course, if there are seeds which are patented outside the continent, maybe it is a bit complicated. But in the perspective of the CAADP, maybe the seeds and fertilizer access should be like free in our countries. That's what I can think. So thank you very much for the question. That's what I can say on that question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those reflections. And it's, of course, very good to see that there's a great level of alignment. And thank you also for raising the point and financing, which is obviously extremely important. And on top of the international sort of policy agenda at the moment, also with the financing for a development conference next month in Sevilla. I have a last question for you before we then go to the other participants. How would you say that policy institutions and think tanks such as yours can support the successful domestication of the Kampala Declaration going forward?
Yeah, think tanks like EPRN, our role I can see it's like first providing that, you know, of course, one of our key activities is doing research. So it is time. I think one of the issues which Osman said, it is the ambitious versus the progress or the reality currently. So we need to do research. If we take those 6 priorities, where are we as a country, as Rwanda? So doing research, providing the status and information to inform the policymakers in terms of providing the evidence for policymaking is one of the role of think tanks like EPRN. Another one is to provide the forum or platform of convening all stakeholders to sit and discuss. Because when we sit in the room like this and discuss on cooperative issues, maybe the way we perceive them, the way we understand the issues on the ground may differ from how the real farmers understand from the grassroots level. So the think tanks can organize policy dialogues, influencing events, allowing all actors from government, private sector, HCOs, farmers, cooperative, to attend and brainstorm on pertaining issues and take together actionable recommendations. So those are the main things I think should be like a contribution, availing reliable data, but also allowing space for discussion from all concerned stakeholders. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those reflections and suggestions as well. So I'd like to open up for questions in the room and also online. If you have a question or comment, please briefly say who you are, quick introduction, and please raise your hands, or online drop your question into the chat. My colleague Laye will be monitoring the online chat for any possible questions, but yeah. I see a hand. Racine, please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Usman, for the presentation. My name is Rasin Lee, and I serve as the Director of Data Management, Digital Products and Technology at AKADEMIYA2063. I have one comment, one information, and one question. The comment is geospatial and AI. I think before CAADP or when CAADP was initiated at that time, using geospatial data and AI was pretty expensive, and even that those technologies were not mature enough to be used. So policymaking usually might use the data at a macroscopic level. I think now we cannot afford not relying on those technologies because they are democratized and cheap enough to be used and to have an impact on the ground. Because the issue with using macroscopic information is you might not be able to know the impact on livelihoods, right? And I think now, since it is cheap enough, it will be mandatory, almost mandatory for all of us to start relying on those technologies to be able to have an impact on the ground. That's my comment. Now, the information is that indeed the indicators that we have under the BR used to be binary, but since the last iteration 2 years ago, we introduced a new way of measuring progress. It's not red for countries that did not reach the let's say the threshold, and green for those who reached it. Now there is blue, which means that you made progress but didn't still reach the threshold. That helps a little bit to reinforce what Dr. Smart was saying, that now we have a way of measuring progress. My question here now is, we saw an increase in public expenditure in agriculture at the beginning. And one of the warning signs are that there's a decrease in terms of trend. My question is, isn't it a positive sign of money well spent during the first 10 years? Because one might say it's not possible to keep investing in agriculture in any country at the same level of growth rate. At some point, you will have to plateau, because if your money is well spent, you will have some good strategic changes that would allow you to spend less, but not zero. You're still spending, but you don't have the same level of spending as the maximum that you've reached. That's why I'm saying, is it something we can consider not as a warning sign, but as a positive sign? And if it's not the case, how can we make sure it's not the case, actually? Let me stop here. Over.
Thank you, Rasin. Usman, I think that might be a question for you to answer.
Okay.
And, I mean,
We don't have any more questions, maybe. Okay. You want to talk to now?
Do you want to do it one by one, or a few?
Yeah, maybe just for the sake of time, I collect 2 or 3.
Briefly introduce yourself.
I can remember the question.
Thank you so much, Hira, the consultant, but also representing Access to Finance Rwanda. And I'll come back to that question of financing. And in the presentation, you focused mainly on public investment, public expenditure in agriculture as stated in the CAADP. So I was wondering, how does it open room for non-state actors? We didn't see much of that, I think, in the presentation, or specifically the financial sector. And we'd like to see the synergy between the agriculture sector and the financial sector, which is more private, And to what extent has that triggered private investment into agriculture? So maybe the development of specific products that are specific to the agriculture sector. So I think we'd like to hear more about that. And on outcome side, we'd like to see, of course, we've seen great investment, great growth, as we've seen in the very nice graphs. But on the outcome level, again, I think, how do we balance that with a high level of hunting and the food security gaps that we still see? So how do we strike the balance between the two situations? The other side, there is great growth, very commendable growth that we're seeing due to CAADP, but on the other, again, I think kind of challenging to address issues related to stunting and food security. Thank you.
Would you like to answer those three questions now with us as well?
Yeah, okay. On the financial thing, CAADP really has struggled to have a handle on private sector financing. To have a good indicator to track it, very difficult. I think that Kampala will do probably better in that because the agenda is much more explicit on it. And I know as AKADEMIYA2063, we're involved in two activities that should help guide Kampala. We're now working on a report that looks at the top 4 African countries that have a sustained public expenditure in agriculture, have been very attractive to FDI and private investment into agriculture sector, that are growing at the same time and having impact on nutrition outcomes, right? So we want to go and see what are they doing. The institutional innovation, policy reforms, programmatic interventions. So that might inform CAADP and Kampala as we go toward the next 10 years. But you're right, the private sector in particular, in terms of financing, has really been a challenge, and we need to know how to do it better. We hope this study will contribute to it. The other thing we're doing is we're working with IFAD right now on the 3 efforts. 3 financial food system financial flows. It's a little bit complicated. So to try and track it and measure it better, including from the private sector as well. So we should have a better baseline to do a better job on the Kampala. But you're right, we're struggling there. On the indicators, actually, there's not very much a contradiction. If you look at all those indicators before the 2000s, right? They were all up. The negative one, I mean, stunting up, or barely, undernutrition up, poverty up. All those things were up, actually, and then they started. But because they were all up, we start from a very high level. So although we have reduced things, the levels are still not acceptable. They're very high, right? But we're the trajectory is correct, is normal, except with malnourishment in general, where the things have started bending up again. So the efforts and the trajectory are consistent with one another. But the level means we need to do better and more. And that's why these warning signs are really an issue, right? When we need to be faster, we're slowing down. Okay, so that's how I see those. And that takes me to Rasin. I think, Rasin, if there were no warning signs vis-a-vis the other indicators, let's say if poverty was still continuing to be reduced rapidly, when capital income was still going up rapidly, GDP going up rapidly, all those things, no other warning sign, I would say it's a sense of efficiency. But because of the other warning signs, then probably we still need to do better and do more. So therefore, probably it's not most likely a sign of efficiency, but a slowdown in effort that needs to be boosted a little bit more. Certainly, the second indicator, the share of agricultural GDP that is returned to agriculture shouldn't be declining that fast and that quickly, given all the challenges we have with the other warning signs. So it is more probably the latter and less an issue of efficiency, I think. Back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Thank you. I am Dr. Prosper Ndizioyo for IPA Rwanda. IPA Rwanda is also a research institution. My question is, we have seen the presentation. We have seen that in general, we see an increase of agricultural production. But there is something that you have to take into consideration in order to know exactly what is happening. That is to compare the production with inputs. Sometimes we look at the production, but maybe the input is higher than the production. For example, if you look at this case here in Rwanda, you see that the budget in agriculture increases with time. Now, I think it is important to consider or to compare the increase of the inputs in terms of budget, in terms of manpower, energy spent in agriculture with the production, so that we not lie ourselves that we are increasing production while we, in compared to the input, we are not performing well. Another thing I'm going to say is the connection between policy and implementers with the beneficiaries, which are farmers. See, for example, at the level of the ministry and the Rwanda Agriculture Board, let me say it, see very good politics, a very good plan, and they try to do many things. But as a researcher, we go on the field many times. When you compare what you see on the field and the politics of people in charge, you see there is something different. So maybe that is where the research will be coming. As Seth says, we are there to do research just to be informing policymakers. And maybe if you go to the field, you say that to do those research, we come and communicate, maybe to try to evaluate why the feasibility of different practices that policymakers in charge are not being feasible there on the field. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you. Let's take your question. And then we'll go to James, and then you can answer.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Dr. Usman, for a very comprehensive presentation. Very interesting warning signs as well as lessons learned from the past. My name is Nomathemba Mhlanga, and I'm with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO. So as FAO, we are happy that we've been with CAADP for the last 20 years. And
since birth.
Yeah. And it's also good for us, a reflection on how things have moved. So a very welcome analysis from our end. I just wanted to comment maybe and ask a question related to the prevalence of undernourishment, which is one of the warning signs that you've highlighted. And as you may be aware, one of the key flagship documents that we have as FAO is the State of Food Insecurity, State of Food and Agriculture as well, SOFA and SOFI, which really tries to zero in on some of these issues. And I think it was the one in 2023, which really looked at the cost of a healthy diet. And I think it's something, it sheds light on some of these warning signs that while I think economic growth has increased significantly in most African countries, this has not really meant diversification of food and actually reaching the vulnerable. And there have been external shocks like the pandemic, the COVID, as well as other external shocks like the drought. Now, my question about the lessons from the past and what we can do going forward. One of the things I think towards the last slide, you mentioned that it would be good to have like signed compacts. And for me, I think one of the things that we've had as a criticism is the proliferation of these documents, like compacts. So what do we do with the ones that were there? There were the CAADP initial CAADP compacts with the NAIBs, and then we have also related compacts that were signed under the African Development Bank. So is there any plan maybe from your end as think tanks to really look at those and see how we can, I don't know, not always coming up with new documents, because I think that's where sometimes tracking progress becomes limited. But very much appreciate the work that you've done, very comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take one more question.
Was James, right?
James, yeah.
Okay, all right, fine, whatever. You know I'm gonna speak for a half hour, so you just let me just, I really appreciated Usman's speech. I think we birthed him from IFPRI, but maybe not with FAO, but birthed the original Usman out of it. But I'm James Warner. I'm a program leader. We're based here in Rwanda. I really want to just take a moment and say thank you for that presentation. We forget the past, and then we see young people, maybe because we're all old now, but we see young people say, oh, this could be a good idea. And was like, well, that was tried 30 years ago. Maybe it's a good idea to temper it or something. But I remember being a professor at an African university in the 90s and giving a lecture about agriculture to a bunch of master students, and they were like, well, we don't care about agriculture. There are a bunch of lazy people that sit under the tree and don't do anything. That was a true vision of what agriculture was, and we've come so far from there. And we should always remember that because, and it certainly, I think, kind of has helped that. I guess my question is just that we are layering the complexities of food systems onto all this reporting and all these activities, and I worry about the complexity of food systems. Seth kind of mentioned, look, let's just take potatoes and go from whatever 18 to 45 or whatever. We all kind of think like that sometimes, that we say, okay, let's have productivity. Productivity is kind of the foundation of this, but there's so many more complexities. And I worry that we get lost in how complex these systems are and how are we going to emphasize what parts of this food systems or what's it, or are we going to try to do it all? I don't know, but from an IFPRI perspective, we were active with PSTA5, and we have these socioeconomic models that have social accounting matrices in 17 different sectors, and they talk about the impacts of productivity on
Poverty.
Nutrition, poverty, whatever, all these other things. Well, now we're being tasked to say, okay, that's not enough. Now you have to try to get into natural resource use and emissions and things. And fine, all these things are fine. And I want to come back to Racine, who was saying, oh, well, let's democratize all this new information we have. But we need people to sort of figure out what is the important information we need to have. Not just that we have information, we certainly have AI, we certainly have a lot of remote sensing and all these other things. But we need to have people that sort of compartmentalize this and organize this into ways that are useful for us, and that we don't get overwhelmed by the information, but we sort of focus that information to the ways we want to achieve what we want to achieve. And I worry with 400 different variables, we lose focus. Not to say that we shouldn't, I think, again, your presentation was excellent, and I think we have these warning signs. Are we just focusing on too few things? Do we have to do other things? Do we have processing, like Seth said, or do we, what do we want to do here? So I just want to recap that food systems is a wonderful idea. I just worry, are we in agreement to what it is and what are we going to do with it? That's all. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, that was the last one
Yes.
too. And I think actually the food system lens is just important as it helps people figure out gaps perhaps and weaknesses. But if you look at the incrementality of the CAADP agenda, it really has its own dynamics, right? It's borrowing from here and there, but it's going from those two CAADP goals, expenditure and growth, to expand to the 7 and now to the 6. Okay, one might think it's getting narrower, but the 6 are unpacking those 7, right? And packaging them into 6 areas. So we always have to worry about that. There's limited time, limited capacity, limited resources. But I hope that if I were in a country doing this, I would look at where I have my biggest gaps when I look at the food system things and how I could plug it as I go, but not try to do everything at once. It's important, right? On the data information, actually, it's not adding, if it fits smart in a smart way, it's not creating new things. It is doing all things differently with better data. You still need to know about your production. You still need to know about your cultivated areas. You still need to know about your yields, those things, right? But rather waiting until after the facts and try and go to the farm to know how much you harvested, you can do it and know it before. You can have a much more precise way of measuring your land. It's just an example, right? These models also would allow you not to wait until you see prices, completely collapsing to be able to maybe anticipate what's going to happen to the markets, right? So I think if you use them, improve the way we used to do business, then they add value. If they're just going to be, for their own sake, then of course it creates an issue to do that, right? So I think, ma'am, the compact in our case was more of a generic thing, but because we're referring to Maputo, whatever we call it, it will be good to have a shared common understanding of what would we want to achieve as a country, right? In other country under Malabo, you have goals, you have targets. How do we go about them? what is priority for us, what isn't priority, like James was saying, right? What do we want to, move forward together? What are the partnership modalities? Just people doing it in the country. It's different, maybe the same terminology as the AFDB Compact, which is a different story. It's more of an internal AFDB tool and so on. But I do agree with you that some of these, things that we sign up there are good as umbrellas, but they're not really the real thing on the ground. You need to get to action on the ground. So the way this is thought, if you look at Malabo, it was basically a little bit hands-offish, right? And a country will say, okay, I'm doing Malabo, but doing something completely different. Actually, they're not even aware of what is really Malabo, because yes, there was one session to talk about it, and then we shake hands and we go, right? But he wants people to be a little bit more systematic. And it might not actually be a compact, something, not even a written document, but just be systematic to know, in a good way, where do we stand vis-a-vis all these indicators, what is possible for us over the next 10 years, and where are the opportunities to do things better, right? So if we share that and then it guides us and have a way of working together, it's fine, whatever we call it. But if we leave it to chance, then we may have the same thing over the last 10 years. So that's what we meant. And the cost of healthy diet certainly got exacerbated by COVID and particularly Ukraine, right? But if you look at your curve, your graph, things started way earlier than that. So there's something happening, right? It could be the cost of diet was still big there, right? But it could be the combination of that. If growth is not tilted toward the poorest, but is pulling demand up and prices are going up, actually the cost of diet is even worse for the poorer. Could be that, right? So we need to unpack it a little bit and understand it. But it's something there that challenges all of us to look into. So thank you for bringing that up. On from IPAR, I think actually the effort that goes into production is reflected in the data that we use. We're using value add. That means that you're subtracting all these efforts out of it. So what you see is the added value that's created. In that sense, captures your concern there. And then we also use that to say, per hectare, are we adding value more than we used before? And per individual farmer, are we adding value more than we used to do before? So in that sense, it's going in the direction that you're saying, and that's what it's doing. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Usman. We have time for a few more questions, but I'd like to go online first. I see that Racine has a hand up again, but I believe there are also a couple of questions in the Q&A. So,
yeah. We have
Laye, can you read out the questions?
Great. We have 3 questions, so I'm just going to read them out. We have one from Foster Maniraguha, and he would like to know what your thoughts are about the new phase of CAADP implementation vis-a-vis food supply and climate change risk and mitigations. So what can we do under Kampala CAADP regarding food supply and climate risk mitigations? Another one from One Wilson on the issue of agricultural expenditure. And he says there is a need to give more focus to the quality and efficiency of agricultural expenditure. Accessing disaggregated data on expenditure on agriculture can shed light on the quality of spending going into the sector. So the question of data is raised here. And we have one from Athanas Hafashimana from the Ames Research and Innovation Center. And he says, given that most African countries rely on rain-fed agriculture, what are the investment plans regarding agricultural mechanization in different regions? And finally, there is a contribution, more of a contribution in the Q&A from Guillaume Nyagatare. And he says, perhaps the unfortunate upward trends in negative indicators such as poverty, stunting, and wasting could be linked with the alarming rise of transnational conflicts and the collapse of law and order in many parts of the world. Continental trade seems not able to grow fast enough to offset loss in revenues due to rising barriers. Therefore, integration, more collaboration among African universities and policymakers are part of the several elements that have to come together for Africa to own its own development in agriculture. So that's more of a contribution. Back to you.
Thank you, Layim. Osman,
Yeah.
over to you.
Okay, so on the on food supply and sustainability and things like that, and what Kampala is going to be doing about it. Actually, one of the very interesting things that we saw lately in the last year's Africa Agricultural Trade Monitor, which we published jointly with IFPRI, which is focusing on climate change. And we're looking at crops for which today we have competitive advantage. We can compete and win in, right? Those crops in about a decade or so, if you don't do something for their salt tolerance, drought tolerance, climate change resistance, and resilience, we'll lose that competitive advantage. So that means that we are able to supply them today, but it's not guaranteed that we'll be able to supply them tomorrow. So therefore, Kampala really ought to invest quite a lot in understanding climate change and what it does and how it changes our stuff. Another way, somebody referred to water, is going to affect food supply. We looked at embedded water in what we trade and what we produce, right? And they have seen that some countries are going to be struggling to maintain their supply, but Africa in general as a group, and somebody talked about trade, if it was smart in the way we trade, there are water-abundant countries that could be growing more water-thirsty crops, while more water-starved countries could be growing more water-efficient crops. Of course, trade can help do that, but it's going to be an issue of research and development to get the new varieties and the like. So our supply today is no way guaranteed for tomorrow, even if you have the same land and the same labor, because climates around us is going to change. And I think the better mitigation adaptation agenda under Kampala compared to Malabo or Maputo, it provides an entry point into doing that. And thank you, one person. It's indeed not the amount of money. Rasin already referred to that, but the efficiency of the money that we're using. So I think you're part of, I think, the technical working group. So Kampala is going to be paying more attention to efficiency compared to in the past. As we go to the final review indicators, we ought to look at ways of measuring efficiency and not just levels and shares to improve the way we do business. I'm not sure mechanization is the answer to everything, but certainly targeted, relevant, and adapted mechanization to improve productivity of and land is very, very, very important. And the last was more of a comment. African universities working together with policymakers, and I think this is really what the Kampala agenda. Within 90 days, across the continent, think tanks and universities came together and produced the best CAADP agenda that we've had. To repeat the words of Dr. Mayaki, the former head of CAADP, this is by far, as he's seen as having been the head of the NEPA Secretariat, the most comprehensive and inclusive CAADP agenda and the most deep agenda in terms of how to look at individual issues. And that's been done by African universities and think tanks. That's the continental level. We need more of that in the country level, right? We have been supporting about 10 to 15 countries with what we call the local analysis network, providing some seed money just to bring that kind of contact between local centers of expertise and the Ministry of Agriculture and others, so that they can be aware of what we're doing each other. Last comment on this, Madam Moderator, because it's important getting these African universities. You know, if we get them involved with the countries and this agenda, it's not just what they do when you need them, but if they have bachelor's thesis, it's probably going to be on the same issues, if they know what Menegri is struggling with. If they have a master thesis, it's going to be something probably along those lines. A doctoral thesis is going to be along those lines. So you're getting things from the budget the government is giving to all these universities, even without asking, because they're aware of what you do. So getting this link between the policymakers and the African universities and think tanks is extremely important in terms of just knowledge creation, but also taking out of these resources we invest in our universities, our research centers, getting more in return for government actions and information. So it's very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Usman. We started a little bit late, so I want to give room for one final burning question, and then we can continue afterwards outside in coffee.
There's one there. Okay, there's another one there. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
he has been raising
Okay,
his
yes.
hand to start.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Chamba Center, right?
Yes.
Okay, welcome. Very good.
And we work on three main areas on how to make professional development assistance more effective, on how to mobilize private finance, on how to break the concentration of large companies in the agricultural space because of market concentration. Regarding the slide that was puzzling on the how come we have the high imbalance and the nourishment despite the growth in GDP and agricultural GDP. And one of the reasons I believe is that most of the finance is supporting export value chains as opposed to domestic value chains for domestic production. That's one of the reasons I believe that because most financing, we look at financing sources, and these sources are financing it. Most of them are financing export value chains. But we need to address how to de-risk financing for domestic production, for domestic consumption. And banks also then the share of agriculture portfolio in the bank's total portfolio is around 4 to 6%. And that's we need to address the how to de-risk the financing for banks. And Asili Africa is a leading in this space. They provide guarantees for local banks to reduce the risk, provide incentives to reduce the costs, and capacity building. Because there was some research that shows that banks that have agribusiness units have lower risk, lower loss of their portfolio as compared to banks that don't have agribusiness units. So we need capacity building for banks, and we need technical assistance for SMEs to increase the universe of bankable products. Because many SMEs don't have the bookkeeping, financial literacy to apply for loans and so on. So we need to address both the supply and demand of financing.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Good, Zimala, I hope the Minister of Agriculture and Resources in charge of export. So my question is around interinstitutional collaboration. The agenda of, as you know, the agenda of CAADP is getting wider and wider with time. In Maputo, we had a sectoral approach where the entry point for the CAADP agenda was the Ministries of Agriculture. And with Malabo, there was an approach that was more centered into around national agriculture investment plans that were a bit, beyond the mandates of the Ministry of Agriculture and Resources. And now we're talking about food systems, which is more wider than Malabo. My question is, have you done any exercise in terms of mapping what is needed in terms of institutional collaboration? And second, do you expect something wider after Kampala? And probably last, when we talk about food systems, most of the time we talk about production systems. Do we ever envisage export strategies or further leverage across continents? Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you. I hear our colleague Racine has a very short final comment, so we'll take that and then we wrap up.
Very good.
Racine, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think the success of a policy depends on several aspects. It depends on the context, geopolitical, geostrategy, the socioeconomic, and also the leadership and the political will of doing it. as we are at the dawn of the Kampala, I just want to say, let's not avoid revisiting old ideas, but with a new context. I think it might make sense. Sometimes we might not invest as much as before, but maybe with a different context, leadership and political will and technology, we might have a different output and outcome. So I think it's a very important aspect for those who are joining the process, and as myself actually. Now they will be equipped with more tools with the experience of those who were here at the beginning since Maputo. I think that might yield a very interesting outcome, probably. Thank you.
Thank you, Racine. And
Thank you for that comment. Thanks, Racine. It's noted. We'll have certainly opportunities to reflect together on that as we proceed here. So thank you for it. Claude, I think it's just not export strategies, but also processing agro-industries, right, which are part of it. Something we have not discussed here, but going forward, I think the emerging processing sector for our staples, not talking about even the big guys, right? Talking about cassava, millet, sorghum, white maize, that processing sector is going to be more important for the smallholder than anything in the past. Because no matter how much cassava you produce and how much millet and sorghum, whatever you produce, if it's not processed, your urbanites will not eat it. They cannot process themselves. It has to be ready to cook, ready to eat, well packaged, and so on and so forth. So what used to be the roads and the markets and the cooperatives to make sure that produce staples can leave the production areas and go into the urban areas for consumption, because you had in all those urban areas people who could process them, is no longer possible. If you ship millet to Dakar today, nobody's going to eat it. They don't know. But if you get it into the processing, it's ready packaged, ready to eat, ready to cook, then they will eat it. So the future of trade domestically and cross-border is trade and exports, right? Right now, I think cross-border trade of staples is made up of processed commodities and semi-processed up to 70%. So therefore, I think how we can be more competitive in the regional markets would be a lot related with how much value we add and how our processing sectors are competitive as we go. You know it in your sectors, coffee and others, and cocoa and so on. So it is really how far we climb up the ladder in these global value chains, but also in these cross-border value chains, how much we add to our processing competitiveness is going to be extremely important. And I think as we go into this roundtable, or whatever we call them, with the different partners, right? As we think about what the outcome is, I think the modalities for partnership will emerge from there. We had that better in the framework of Maputo than we had because we didn't have that opportunity to sit together in Malabo. I think as we go towards Kampala, if you look at the list of participants we had for the Maputo roundtables, if you got all those ministries there and all those different non-state actors and others around the table, I think the intersectorality of these things will come out, I think, right? But you're right, we are broader now, and the more we understand how we add value to each other and work with each other, the more successful we will be. And maybe as to the complexity that James was saying, it's no longer 1 or 2 actors, it's now 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 actors that have to work together. So it's going to be tough, yeah. On the financing, I think here, it is tough up to now to do. Even the de-risking you can do for a few. The issue that we have a dispersed population of smallholder farmers across large space just raises the transactions cost to do this. There are new technologies to improve and do it. There are new ways of scoring the risk so that to make it easier for banks to lend money. And there's new ways now putting them into the banking system, quote unquote. It was mobile banking across Africa, where we're almost a pioneer globally. So there are options to do that, but the issue is really going to scale. We can do a few things, de-risk here, de-risk that, capacity building here and that, but when do we go to scale and how? That's the biggest issue. And I think that's where we'll have to be very, very innovative, using better technologies and smarter ones to do that. We are exploring partnership with the University of Imperial College in London to see if we can work together in something like that. Hopefully it works, we'll see. But we need to be smarter in just overcoming these obstacles, institutional, physical, infrastructural, to be able to still reach the smallholders in a way that is acceptable for the banks. And it has the private sector to come in and do business with them. So thank you for that. Back to you, Madam.
Thank you so
Moderator.
much, and thank you for all the very good questions, both here in the room and online. I think we'll have the opportunity to continue the conversation over coffee in a moment. So now I'd like to invite my colleague Serafin Yonsenga. Serafin, where are you? For very quick reflections about what you've heard last hour and a half.
Yeah, you need a mic for people online.
Well, thank you so much. It has been really an interesting event and really quite interactive, really learning. We learned a lot of in the history, institutional memory, learn what happened, and really as a lesson going forward. But the key message that really, yes, we have had good successes, but how do we build on the success really to move forward? And also in the context of really emerging technologies, climate change is looming. So how do we really go forward and do things in a different way, as Usman insisted? How do we do things in a different way? And again, as Claude said, we are now going to system thinking. So how do we get really institutions to collaborate, not work in a silo, so that we can really deliver on this agenda? So in a nutshell, this discussion has been quite interesting, interactive, and I think that our colleague Lai, who has emails of colleagues here present, will be able to share some of the materials that we talked about here in this room. And we thank you for your presence in this room. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Kamana for your concluding remarks, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. This has been very interesting. And for me, let me confess that I was just learning. It was a learning process to go through the 20 years of CAADP. It was really very inspiring. And so the major takeaway that I'm getting from this is the slide on where we are now and where we are supposed to be. So to find that Rwanda as a country managed to narrow the gap between the expectations and the current situation. So this is a good message that shows that as Rwanda, we are performing quite well against the indicators in CAADP. And now we are at the end of the first year of PSA5. It seems to be so fast because when we designed this PSA5, we had in mind that we needed to achieve some targets, but the magnitude of the targets that we have now for PSA5 are the same as the same for PSA4. So for PSA4, we had 7 years. For PSA5, we have 5 years only. And from July 2024 to June 2025, 1 year is already gone. So which means 20% of PSA5 that is supposed to be covered. So this puts a kind of pressure on us to see, so where are we now? We are going to evaluate ourselves in 1 month, collaboration with the Ministry of Economic, Minecofield, and the National Institute of Statistics to try to see where are we now. So the results may be somehow shocking because times goes so fast. We are more busy with handling the crisis and we tend to lose the focus. So when I attend an event like this comes also as a kind of to a lesson and also a kind of wake-up call. So even though we are all day-to-day handling the crisis, but we still have this agenda to comply with. So, and the PCA5 is also the first. We say that it's the first of its kind in Africa. Policy that is food systems centered. We don't have any. We can't afford to perform in a way that is not expected. So we're going to do our best to perform as expected. And as Rwanda, we are good achievers. For PSTF5, we are really committed to bring up interesting results and move forward. So I conclude by thanking you, Usman, thanking Academia for inviting us for this very interesting event, thanking the participants for their contributions and insights. So let's have a nice evening and continue our discussions outside.
If I just want to ask those who are online before you leave, if you can, just put your email address in the chat box if you want to be on our mailing list, so we can add you to our mailing list. Please do that, or send an email if you can. And those who are here, maybe Seraph and somebody can walk around with a sheet just to put people to put if they want to be on the mailing list, so that you can get our documents as they come out. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Urakoze Chane. All right.
So we have a photo outside there. Our gentleman is the.
Oh, you mean a photo?
Yes.